live.
Afterwards.
Yeah. Bear with us. A couple more minutes. Boom, we're on.
Yeah.
Live. Yeah. Right, so I need to mute that screen. Give me a second while I do this. It's on there, isn't it?
Yeah,
so we need to mute. Yes, it's like lag, isn't there? So we'll go back to our Zoom chats, and here we are.
Yay!
We're in.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Ian.
There's the manage participants window. Yeah. There it is. Right, that's it. We're on. We're live.
Yeah.
Hello, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, both. How are you? Hello, Herman.
We're very good. Welcome to the MDTV. First proper interview with us, isn't it, Michael? You've done conferences with us, but not done a full-length interview with you.
No, this is the first time I've been here in the room with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. It's good to be able to have a one-on-one and ask some questions. And
No, to be good. The different scene. Nice. Sorry, can't hear you. That's better.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
What's going on with this?
Now I can.
Okay.
Something going on with the connection.
Oh.
That one.
I don't know.
How's that?
I can hear you now.
And we don't sound too echoey, do we? We sound all right?
No, you sound fine. I need to say it twice then.
Oh,
that was very good.
yeah, got our stand-up comedian, Michael Feeley.
Yeah.
Who's sitting down?
Yeah.
Telling us for the next 2 hours.
Yes.
Yeah. That long? Yeah, tell me it was 10 minutes.
Oh dear. Right, just double check that we are live, aren't we?
Yes, we are. It's saying we're live. I saw us on the YouTube channel.
All good then.
Yeah. So your presentation today, or your interview, is going to be about a lot of various topics, isn't it? But in essence, about our true nature, our divine nature, and the role of consciousness. But you draw on so many different angles and different disciplines and aspects, don't you? From ancient history, ancient civilization, to science, to history. It's all encompassing, really.
It's pretty much every conceivable angle that we know, which is really talking about the same thing. And although initially I believed it to be separate things, I found it to be actually all the same. And whether you go to the quantum mechanics, whether you go to spirituality, the ancient world, religions, everything you can possibly think of, it's all connected to the same thing, which is really the enlightenment of humanity and how to transmute both physically, genetically, spiritually, and how all of these clues and how all of these answers have been left as a trail of breadcrumbs throughout the world for us. So really it is all encompassing. It's every particular angle you can come in from, but it always leads to the same place. And what I tend to find is that I go deeper and deeper and deeper and more advanced into the subjects, but again it always comes back to the same place. It just comes back to the same place at a more advanced level. So every conceivable way that I've gone into this, it comes back to the same place, giving me the same information, giving me the same answers.
Yeah, things are kind of hidden in plain sight, aren't they? If people have the eyes to see.
It really, well, it's hidden in plain sight, but it's hidden by codes and metaphors and stories that are there specifically to hide these codes. So what has happened is the people who wish to retain this knowledge, the sexual priesthoods, the ancient priesthoods, they've encoded this knowledge within metaphors, within codes, so that only the initiates can understand the true meaning of these words, and everybody else really are believing a story and pinning their life hopes on, in essence, a story. What is really true is what is behind the story that people are not being taught or people are not realizing. So everybody every day will see hundreds, if not thousands, of these symbols everywhere you go. Buildings, architectures, car logos, brand company names. You will see all of these symbols each and every day, all day. But most people just see them as pretty pictures or pretty geometry. But there's actually a hidden meaning in there, and that hidden meaning is really the true essence of what they're hiding from us. So it's a fascinating world. It really is a fascinating world when you start to express and speak different languages. And when you start speaking the language of codes and metaphors and symbols, then you start to realize the mentality and what they were really hiding from us and what they really know that is not being taught to the mass majority of people.
And a lot of it's hidden to kind of maintain that order and control. So people keep relinquishing their power and don't realize their own.
It is what people are doing is, when you look into the brain and how the brain works, most people live in a Newtonian world, Newton physics, which is the world of predictable outcomes. So most people will live in a world of predictable outcomes. I will predict that at 9 o'clock in the morning, on Monday morning, I'm going to work. At 12 o'clock, I'm having lunch. 2 p.m, I'm having a coffee break. 5 p.m, I'm coming home. This becomes Newtonian predictable outcomes. And Newton used the laws of force, acceleration, and all of the and matter to come up with predictable outcomes. And we live in that world of predictable outcomes. So if we want to break predictable outcomes and we want to break the familiar past and the predictable future, then sometimes we have to step into the unknown, out of our comfort zone, and break out of that routine. Because only then, and what happens with the brain is the brain will create these neural pathways that thrive on these routines as a chemical fix. So it's almost like a drug. So if you don't stick to those routines, if you don't stick to this predictable future, then you suffer. It's almost like cold turkey from a drug. And most people thrive on the routine of their everyday. So what is really found is that to step outside of that, to change those predictable futures, you step outside into the unknown, which is, of course, you then start to go into the quantum field. You then start to reconnect to the unified field of pure awareness rather than living in a body of senses in a sensory world. And every time we come out of a dream state, we're coming back into this sensory world. So we need to sort of step outside these Newtonian physics, the world of predictable outcomes, and change the future for ourselves.
Yeah, and that's an important message more than ever now, isn't it? And the world's just gone crazy, really. Everybody's on lockdown and fearful, and you know the mass media is projecting so much fear into people's minds, and it's very Newtonian. It's very much about safety and physical security, and it's sort of focused on that. What would you say about that, Michael? What are your views?
I've been watching this game of chess for the last 10 years, and I've been watching each of the pieces be moved. Now, what was once the term that's quite a cliche now, the totalitarian tiptoe, but that tiptoe has now taken one giant leap, and it's taken one giant leap in the last 4 weeks because of this coronavirus. Now, for me, when you've been watching what's been going on for the last 10 years, and you hear where global politics is taking us and where various leaders who have admitted this during their public talks, which are all on YouTube, they're all on public record, Gordon Brown, Obama, Cameron, all of these talking about a new world order. When we get this new world order, you have the Bush family doing it, the Clintons doing it.
Yeah.
All of these, about 6 or 7 years ago, I wrote to my MP and said, what do you know about the new world order? And he wrote back saying conspiracy theory. So I put together this video of about 10 minutes with every leader, Western leader, over the last 6 or 7 years during their speech talking about a new world order. And I sent it back saying, is this a conspiracy theory? Because the evidence is there in public record. Now, when you know what the end result of this global politics is, you can see that they've pretty much achieved all but a few in the last 4 weeks with this global coronavirus. Now, that is the microchip of humanity. That is the increased surveillance of humanity. That is a one world currency. It is basically a cashless society. So we have all of these things where we've gone from that totalitarian tiptoe to a giant leap in the last 4 weeks to get this end result. And when you've been watching the pieces for the last decade, you can see how they're all coming together and how they're being moved. And this really is almost a stroke of genius. My opinions on the coronavirus is, yes, there is something going on, but you cannot catch a virus. Virus means poison. Now, what a virus is the body's reaction to environmental conditions. The biggest environmental condition that has changed in the last few months is 5G. Conveniently, they just put 5G towers up in Wuhan, where it started. The cruise ship that started all off, where the holidaymakers were confined to the cruise ship for 2 weeks, had just had a 5G mast. We have a 5G mast being beamed from space now with all these satellites.
Yeah.
We have all of these 5G masts going up all over the world. And for me, the coronavirus is really a cover for the illness that people are suffering from this radiation from the 5G masts. It's a convenient cover-up because people are becoming ill. Now, these 5G masts, they have many symptoms, but one of them is flu-like symptoms. When I was in a former career of 17 years, when we started to have the new radios, the new airwave radios, there was concerns about the radiation, and certain people were actually getting cancers, breast cancers, having started to use these airwaves radios. Now, when they first came out, there were random people selected to have a medical. They were meant to have a medical 5 years later as a comparison of the results. Now, they had the first medical, but miraculously, they never had the second. So there's never comparable as to the health effects of this radiation. I asked my MP what data, what scientific data has been generated by anybody anywhere to suggest that 5G is safe, to suggest that it has no harmful effects on the human body. And he wrote back and said, there isn't any. And I wrote back saying, isn't it a bit stupid to be rolling all this out without any test whatsoever? You know, you're going to see the more people dying, for a fact. Certainly in the future, there's going to be more degenerative disease reported. And of course, you know, there'll never be a link to this, because I also know for a fact that the government figures, as always, are completely fabricated. I know for a fact people have committed suicide and their death certificate says coronavirus. I know for a fact people who've died of cancer, their death certificate says coronavirus. I know for a fact people who've died of pneumonia and their death certificate says coronavirus, etc., etc., etc. There's a complete fabrication of the figures. All of this, I can smell a rat.
Yeah.
And when you can smell a rat, there's normally one somewhere in the corner. And that's basically what I'm smelling now. It is a convenient cover story. And I do acknowledge that something's going on and people are becoming ill, but I think it's a convenient cover story to cover up all the lawsuits, to cover everything that's going to be forthcoming when people start to become even more ill because of all these radiation poles that are being put up everywhere. Now, they will get around that saying it's not us, it's coronavirus.
Yeah.
Very, 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 very convenient. And that really is my take on, it's really it's a multi-tiered thing really, where everyone's going to be vaccinated, which again is part of that plan that I've been watching for 10 years.
Yeah.
What will happen soon, and it's already been spoken about, that people won't be able to travel internationally unless they've been vaccinated. So that straight away limits people's movement around the world, you know, and these people, when you look into they don't have humanity's interests at heart. The people who are really running this world do not have humanity's interests at heart. It's some kind of dark force, and you know they infiltrate the good groups that are trying to counteract this dark force. Now, how many people have signed petitions for change.org? Well, when you look into change.org, you'll find that one of their extremely generous contributors is Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates has left an absolute trail of devastation in Africa, a part of the world that has no voice, with his vaccines, with his mandatory vaccines, and with his experiments. You know, so the world is not what people believe the world to be. There really is an underlying evil that don't have humanity's interests at heart, you know, and there is a campaign to reduce the population, which again is another way in which they're taking us. So this coronavirus is really moved their agenda forward 10 years, in my opinion, in the space of a few weeks, because there isn't a great deal left for them to do in order for them to have achieved this global politics, which is a one world system. Now, we're already having prominent people, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, saying that we need a world government to tackle a world issue. Well, there you go. There's your one world system of government, your new world order.
Yeah.
Which I've been told, is a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what happens, because conspiracy theories turn out to be true every time.
Yeah,
Yes,
they do.
they do.
You can't make this stuff up. We saw just yesterday that there's a trial going on in the States at the moment for a vaccine for the supposed coronavirus. And lo and behold, this vaccine contains artificial RNA, which has to be activated once injected using an electrical current. Now, if that isn't microchipping, then I'm sorry, and I'll put my tinfoil hat away, but I don't know what is, because introducing artificial agents into the body to combat a virus, or so-called virus, which are electrical in nature, they're mechanical, and it's you can't make it up. It's like the jigsaw's just being laid out in front of us at the moment, and yet people are still blind to this.
Exactly, and they are completely blind to this. And of course, yes, vaccinations. Now, there isn't really a test for coronavirus, because there is, in every case, an 80% false positive.
Yeah.
Now, everybody carries the coronavirus. They always have carried the coronavirus. There are certain things that activate these viruses within us. And as I say, that the body's reaction to environmental issues are what we see or perceive as the virus symptoms: sneezing, vomiting, coughing. It's the body getting rid of this internal poison, which is a result of external sort of symptoms. So, of course, when they start injecting us with these vaccines, because people are testing positive, the UK government have bought all these testing kits from Europe, which are contaminated with coronavirus. Now, if you have a cold or you have flu, you will test positive to coronavirus. The current COVID-19 is not a member of the coronavirus family. And it's been found that in the middle of this corona or this COVID-19, there is some kind of special protein that is in the center of the genome of this so-called virus that enables it to get into the cells of the human body. So we are looking at something that is an external manipulated force. And of course, again, I will say, and I will repeat, that this is a convenient cover-up for the illnesses that are now coming in. Because there are these masks that are untested masks that are beaming from space, they're beaming from streets. There's even now workers putting 5G boosters in lampposts and street lighting. And they're putting them in the lights so you can't see them. And they've been seen and observed doing it.
Yeah.
So we have it from all over this place, and it's really a convenient cover-up that we just so happen to have a global virus that, where we've literally closed down the world for this virus. Have we ever done it for any other virus? No. Have you ever done it for any other virus that has a far greater death toll than this? No. So you ask yourself, what is happening at this particular time for all these measures to have been taken?
Yeah. And this is all kind of come about because people are kind of asleep, not able to recognize and realize, or have forgotten their true nature, which is part of the big topic that you want to share, or the message you want to share to humanity, isn't it?
It is that the message to humanity is its true essence, which is really that we're all supernatural beings. We are all connected to supernatural space and supernatural stuff, but we've shut ourselves down from it. Now, we all have this wonderful supernatural information all around us all the time, every day. And that is the quantum field that some people call the Akashic records. But it is really the quantum data of the quantum field that is forever around us. And every single one of us has the ability, has the opportunity to connect to these subatomic particles. Now, the human body, human DNA, was programmed outside of Earth. The human physical body is a result of an exploding star that has created what's called the triple alpha effect in the Orion Nebula. So that our physical body is from Orion, and our genetics, which is inherent of our language, so the language that we speak is really an expression of genetics. And because we all have different cross genes, cross genetics, Planet X of the Anunnaki story, there appears to be different races on Earth, and there appears to be different races of what we deem to be extraterrestrials, because we all have different gene pools that have been programmed outside of Earth that have come here from other places and navigate and gravitated towards certain star systems. Now, we've come from the pure awareness into a third dimensional frequency. Now, what happens when you have the universe, uni meaning one, that is one verse, that is one quantum field, that is this unified field of pure awareness, and that is a waveform. Now, through observation, we collapse that waveform into particles, which is physical matter. It's called the collapse of the wave function scientifically. So when you are observing, you can collapse that wave into a physical matter, into a physical form. And that really is how we observe our reality into existence. There's also greater powers that some people would call God or the creator or the source that is observing this reality into existence as well. Now, when you look at the double slit experiments of science that proved that these subatomic particles knew that they were being observed, and every time they were being observed, they changed their behavior. How did they know they're being observed? Because when anybody observes something, the observer beams photons off that which is being observed. So therefore, because that which is being observed, it sounds like faulty towers, but that which is being observed knows, because it realizes that photons are being bounced off it, so it realizes that it's under observation and it behaves differently. Now, if we're in the garden dancing and happy and we see the neighbours looking at us through the window, we also begin to behave differently. And this is no different in the subatomic world. So through observation, we can collapse that wave function into physical reality, and that is how we observe our reality into existence. And we all, through this kind of knowledge, through this kind of practice, we can actually return to that pure awareness. But we don't have to collapse and die to do it. We can return to that pure awareness. Now, what all of these ancient structures were teaching us and telling us is to activate our crystalline antenna, which is the pineal gland. Once you activate your pineal gland, that is really a sophisticated aerial whereby all of these complex messages, these higher messages from the cosmos, are descrambled by the brain into a meaningful message and sometimes into imagery. Now, that imagery is what the Egyptians gave us as hieroglyphs, or the Nazca lines, or crop circles. It's this imagery from this higher place that is being descrambled by the brain into these meaningful images. And that really is, you know, when you look at the Great Pyramid, it marks the endocrine system of consciousness of the brain, which is the thalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. So you have the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and there's a little tower inside the Great Pyramid, which is the thalamus. All of this is really telling us of sexual alchemy, because chem gives us chemistry, gives us alchemy, which is Egypt. When you look at the word priest, it comes from magi, which is magush, which means magician and alchemist. So the early priests were alchemists and magicians from primarily the mystery schools of Egypt. So we have this knowledge trail that's come from the likes of the mystery schools of Egypt through the priesthoods, kept secret by the priesthoods and the pharaohs, and it's gone through the very essence of Christianity and all of these religions, which really stem from the same place. And it's all to do with sexual alchemy. And when you realize how the brain works and how the body works, and how by certain breath techniques you are able to raise your cerebrospinal fluids from the lower chakras up to the brain and back in 12 hours. When this happens, you are creating an electromagnetic field, which gives you the apple of Eden, which is the Garden of Eden, which is the body. Now, this cerebrospinal fluid creates gamma waves, and gamma waves vibrate typically at 40 hertz, which is a super consciousness frequency. And that is why the number 40 is repeated time and time again in the Bible. You know, life begins at 40. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. He's talking about the gamma waves of frequency of super consciousness. All of these monuments and monoliths were telling us this. So you have the thalamus, the pineal gland, and the pituitary gland, which is marked and mapped by the Great Pyramid of Egypt. So what does that mean for sexual alchemy? Well, the pineal gland regulates sex drive. The pituitary gland releases sex hormones, and the thalamus is basically erectile stimulation. Now, when you look at the subterranean chambers beneath it, that really represents the subconscious mind, which releases sex pheromones. So what we have here is all of these component parts talking about sexual alchemy and how to use what the priesthoods would call celibacy, and how you can achieve this inner Christ, this inner Christos, this inner fire, this pyromantic divination, which is divinity by fire, pyramidos, fire in the middle. You can do all this by sexual alchemy, which is known as celibacy, or sexual sublimation, or sexual continence, which is basically retaining the seed rather than wasting it. So it's without sort of explosive discharge. So you're thrusting this energy upwards instead of outwards. And this is what the priesthoods would call celibacy, but they're misusing it and they're not controlling their sexual urges, which is why many of them are coming to criminal offences, because they can't control this celibacy sexual urges. So we have all of these ancient cultures that are telling us, you know, we have 9 pyramids of Egypt. Why is the 9 pyramids of Egypt? Because there are 9 stages of alchemy. And the 9th pyramid, the Great Pyramid, is really alchemical completion. You have become esoteric man. You become the man of knowledge, the number 9. And number 9 is significant again throughout the ancient world. So is the number 153, which gives you 9. 1 + 5 + 3 is 9. All of these things relate to 9. All the Platonic solids relate to number 9. The movement of the zodiac relates to number 9. The new sign every 2,160 years, 2 + 1 + 6 is 9. We have all of these things that relate to esoteric man, completed man, and that is why there are 9 pyramids in Giza. The heads of Easter Island, why can we only see the heads of Easter Island? Because they're telling us about the divine mind. They're telling you not to concentrate on the body of senses, but to concentrate on the divine mind. And that way you will live this reality back in the pure awareness of the unified field. And we have all of these clues all around the world that are telling us how to recapture our divinity.
Wow. Going back to what you said, you made a crucial point there about the sexual energy. When you say about celibacy, are you suggesting that people should sort of abstain completely, or are you talking about the tantric sexual practice of bringing the energy up to pineal gland before eventually releasing, as it were?
That's pretty much what they're saying. I mean, I'm certainly not saying abstention, but when you say thou shalt not commit adultery, what that's really saying is thou shalt not waste the sacred seed, the sacred energy, the sacred sexual energy of creation. Now, all of creation is a fusion. It is an intercourse. It is the union of opposites that come together with this energetic explosion. Now, that's the same with humans. That's the same with atoms, subatoms. They all marry each other in this marriage of unity, this marriage of union of opposites. So what it's really saying is don't waste the sacred seed, don't commit adultery, but use the sexual energy for the thrust upwards rather than the spasm of the animal, which is satanic consciousness, the consciousness of lust. Now Satan really tempts man through woman, through lust, through sexual appetite, and this is why we have a world of satanic consciousness, which is sexual lust. And that is really then takes us into the Adam and Eve story about Eve being tempted, who then tempted Adam. So we have all of these things telling us and warning us of how to get back to this divinity and how not to fall into that satanic consciousness.
I would add also, that's very, good point. And I would add to that, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, if everything is about the masculine and feminine and the sexual energy, then in essence, everything we do needs to be treated with a sacredness and with that state of consciousness. What would you say to that?
It does. Now, what we have in our reality is duality. And when you look at the beginning of everything, the beginning of the universe, what some people call the Big Bang, some people call the one-time beginning, other people call other things. It started as a monopole, one pole, which separated into dipole, into duality. Now, what duality does is it creates 2 points of consciousness, which is where you are and where you want to be. Now, in order to get from where you are to where you want to be, You have to think, you have to create, you have to do something in order to close the separation between those 2 points of consciousness. When you close those 2 points of consciousness, it becomes one, becomes a unified field. So what duality does is gives people the mechanism and the room in which to evolve, in which to grow. That is why we live in a dualistic reality. Now, again, looking at Newtonian physics, that the third law of Newtonian physics tells you that is the law of action and reaction, which is duality. Now, an example of that is you can't touch without also being touched. So if I was to touch this computer screen, the computer screen is also touching me. That is an action and reaction. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And that's really what Newtonian physics is telling you. It's telling you about duality. But we must close that gap so there is no separation between those 2 points of consciousness. Then we remove duality, we then become non-dualistic, and we then return back to the unified field of pure consciousness. And that really is what duality gives us, polarity gives us. It is the opportunity to grow and evolve as beings.
Yeah, and what are you seeing now? I mean, in this climate that we're in, are you seeing that more people are waking up, that more people are starting to realise that reality is not what it seems?
What I've noticed is, again, when you look at universal creation, there is what is known as a parity, which some people see as yin and yang, as black and white, which is really, again, some say negative and positive. Now, what was created in the universe was what's called a parity, which is basically 50% of each, 50% what you deem as negative, 50% as what you see as positive. So universally, there is no difference. It was created in equal measures. Now, the only difference between what we deem as positive and negative is the electrical charge. If I get something that's positive and flip its electrical charge, it becomes negative, and vice versa. What I'm seeing is pockets of people who are beginning to question and beginning to realize. Now, if you can take a positive out of this current climate, what I've seen is the world has had a rest. Now, there's not so many cars on the streets, there's not so many airplanes in the sky, there's not so many people walking around. People are predominantly, as much as possible, working from home. They've returned back to their families. They're only going out when they need to go out. So what I see is the balance of family life becoming more prominent, whereas the routine that I was talking about earlier on, about this chemical fix of the neural pathways of we must have this routine, we must go to work at 9 and come back at 5, those are beginning to collapse through this global pandemic. Now, what I'm hoping is that at the end of all this global pandemic, when they've done what they need to do and the streets don't need to be empty anymore, when we come to the end of this pandemic, people have seen a different way. People have seen that, okay, well, if I can work from home now, why can't I work from home from here on in? You know, what employees, well, if I want to help with this so-called global warming and this pollution, why don't I let my employees work from home because it's been successful during this pandemic? So what I've seen is everything has become still, everything has become silent. And in that silence and in that stillness, that's where everything happens. And people are hopefully collapsing those neural pathways of routine and actually seeing a different way in which we can do things and a different way in which we can live our life, which is one of a family balance rather than constantly out working. So I hope that there will be a change as a result of basically what's been thrust upon us. So we can see the negative side of it, or we can flip that electricity, and that then becomes a positive. And I hope that is what happens for the large case following this pandemic.
Yeah, we've certainly been, although it's challenging, we've certainly been trying to veer towards the positive and steering people to the positive aspects of this and the opportunities that are presented now. You know, a lot more people, you know, alternative and not alternative communities noticed are getting more interested in sourcing their own food, growing their own food. It's basic things, but I think they all lead to a healthier lifestyle, like you were mentioning about, you know, family life, work balance. You know, it's all leading to becoming more self-sufficient as well, connecting with nature, and maybe even looking within, which is something that you know, generally is not part of the program or the the status quo. It's very much about looking outward. So
Mm.
there's potentials there, isn't there? And it's great having you on the show to be able to give this information that's there, hidden away in all these different civilizations. I just think it's amazing how this is all kind of coming out now, in the recent times, recent decades. It's like, it's meant to be.
Well, everything in the universe is timed, and everything is cyclical in nature. So everything is timed. So this now can't be any different to any other universal timing. I think what people are starting to realise now is that we become so reliant upon government, we become so reliant on outside sources to supply our needs, that if they turn around and say, we're not doing it now, people are genuinely in trouble. And I think what people have realised is that they need to become more self-sufficient. They need to understand how to look after themselves. There's so many people now in my street who are now growing mini allotments in their back garden and starting to grow their own food, which they never did before, because they can just go to Tesco's or Aldi and who will supply it for them. And I think what these kind of things have made people realise is stop being reliant upon outside sources, because at any given moment, you can be taken out. Because if you rely on one bridge to cross and all of a sudden that bridge isn't there anymore, you're really stranded. So I think people are now learning to actually build other bridges alongside those in order for that not to happen. So yes, and that to me does obviously mark a rise in consciousness, a rise in awareness, a rise in the capacity to think. And when people start to think, when people start to create, it goes back to what I was saying about reducing those 2 points of consciousness back to no separation. And because of this kind of thing, I'm starting to see that, and I'm starting to see encouraging signs of that, because people now need to realise that you need to be self-sufficient and not be reliant upon everything else. Because at any given moment, if you are stranded. If they turn around and say, no more, we can't get to you, or we don't want to get to you, you are really stranded. So people do need to be more self-sufficient, and this kind of thing has helped them or forced them to realise that.
Yeah, we looked into this just the other day, didn't we, about how short actually the supply and demand chain is with things like food. And I think I can't remember what interview we're listening to. It might have been part of the David Icke one actually. They're saying that if the food supply stopped, it would literally be like 48 hours before there would be no food available. So that's how we're so dependent on this system, and the system is so fragile that it could literally take a couple of days for it to completely collapse. So yeah, I think I agree with you. It's a good thing that people are going, well, actually, hang on a minute, I've got some land outside. I could be growing my own carrots, and next door can be growing some potatoes, and we can swap a bit. And Ethel down the road is going to grow some cabbages, and we suddenly start, well, yeah, we're too dependent on what comes down to us. Yeah.
We are. It's because we're programmed to be focused on everything else, and everyone has such a busy lifestyle. I remember as a child, which was only 3 or 4 decades ago, honestly, but I can remember being a child, and the sense of community spirit that was around then, when we used to have street parties. Everybody used to know each other. We used to go around to your neighbour's house and have lunch, and everybody knew each other. Now, in a very, very short time, that community spirit has disappeared, and a lot of it has been helped, but that community spirit has disappeared. Now, I think it was last night or the night before, at 8 o'clock, everybody was out in the street giving a round of applause for the NHS.
Yeah.
Now, the sense of community spirit came back in that instant.
Yes, it did.
We all went back into the house after that and closed our doors for the evening. But for that minute, 2 minutes, that sense of community spirit came back.
Yeah,
and
the collective consciousness effect there as well. We felt it as well. It's like everyone's tuning in. Everyone in the whole of the UK was tuned into the same thought for those couple of minutes, and you could tangibly feel it, that there was a unity there. It wasn't imagined. It's a physical sensation. It's awesome.
Well, it's what you class as a type 1 civilization, where group unity consciousness can literally move worlds. And when you have group unity consciousness together, that is what creates self-radiant balls of light, vacuum domains. And when you see spiritual gatherings get together and you see all these orbs on photographs that people tell you are speckles of dust. What it really is consciousness, the type 1 civilization of consciousness, creating self-radiant balls of light, which are basically the hypersphere, the noosphere of human consciousness. Now, if you put that on an even grander scale, it is those self-radiant balls of light, the plasma balls, that have been seen creating crop circles. And those 2 plasma balls of light have been recorded as having intelligent communication between them. So that is someone's mind somewhere controlling those balls of light to create those pictorial landscape pictures. So the human mind is so powerful, especially when it's collective, that we can literally move worlds when we get together. And that is why there's been a campaign for so long to segregate people and keep people apart, because that without a community spirit, without a unified humanity, then we are basically depriving ourselves of this consciousness power.
Yeah, that reminds me of a question I was going to ask you earlier. If you look at the messages within the ancient cultures and societies, like the ancient Egyptians, what would you say the level of ability and a level of potential was there? How do you feel, or what do you know people were like then? You know, were they able to do a lot more with their minds than we are now?
Yeah, well, first of all, these ancient sites are at least hundreds of thousands of years old, if not 500,000 years old. I believe that they were there before the civilizations who used them were there. I believe certain individuals within these civilizations were taught by a higher intelligence how to use them. Now, they had a lot more abilities because they were taught how to express these abilities. They went through many years. You know, Pythagoras was an Egyptian mystery school initiate for 22 years. You know, you have the Greek philosophy that comes from the mystery schools of Egypt. You know, you have, as I said earlier, the elder Christianity and the whole of religion that comes from these ancient principles. You have the Kabbalah, who were responsible really for writing the Bible, the Pharisees, the Kabbalah. You know, when Moses received the 10 Commandments, receive in Hebrew is Kibbel, which gives you a Kabbalah. So he's basically receiving this knowledge. So these ancient cultures were taught how to create these abilities within them or reactivate these abilities within them by using monuments, resonance chambers, again, sexual alchemy, how to thrust this energy upwards. Now, the whole of the Moses story really is telling us, if we wish to release ourselves from captivity, which is the lower chakras, we must take the path of least resistance, which in Gnostic terms is known as the open sea. So there you go. There's Moses opening the parting of the Red Sea. That is the path of least resistance from your captivity to your promised land, which is your consciousness, your Christ consciousness. And if you follow Moses, you follow the Thelema, you follow your spiritual desire, your strong will, and you take the path of least resistance to the promised land, your consciousness. So all of these things are left for us to find. And there were certain priesthoods who taught the pharaohs, you know, the high priests of Egypt were really the ones in charge of all these initiations. If you were able to alleviate yourself from your animal soul, your animal instinct, now the spasm of the animal, going back to sexual alchemy, you were allowed to go through the Sphinx, which is really symbolic of overcoming your animal nature. Only the true human can go through the Sphinx to the initiations, because you must get past your basically spasm of the animal, your animal instinct. So this is what the Sphinx really represents. Now, the Sphinx has no nose, and people have come up with theories, you know, as Napoleon's rifleman and have shot, having target practice, shot the nose of the Sphinx. But really, it's a deliberate message. When you look at the word spirit, it comes from spiritus, which means breathing. So spirituality is the art of breathing. So we have lost the art of breathing. That is why there is no nose on the Sphinx. We have lost the art of breathing. We have lost our spirituality. So when we breathe correctly, we thrust this cerebrospinal fluid up to the brain. And this takes 12 hours to get to the brain and back. The importance of 12 hours is there are basically 43,200 seconds on 12 hours on the clock face. Now, when you reduce that by a factor 10, it becomes 432, which is 432 hertz, which is the frequency of phi, which is really the geometric creation of the human body and the universe. So we have, again, the breath techniques. You know, why do the Egyptians, why are they associated with a bumblebee? Because the Brahmari means bumblebee, and it is a breath technique where you create the humming sound of the bee to empty your mind in a meditative state. So they're telling us, they're giving us these clues to follow what they once did. Stonehenge is now different. You know, as I was saying, that the pituitary gland releases sex hormones. It also releases a chemical known as vasopressin. Now, what that does is it creates a water-based, more water-based body. Now, the pituitary gland is Isis. That is why she's the river goddess, because this vasopressin that is released by the pituitary gland creates this water-based body. Now, water is a conduit for the higher frequencies that are coming into the pineal gland. And we need this water to act as a conduit for these higher frequencies coming in. So the pituitary gland and the pineal gland are working together. And that is exactly why you have the altar stone off centre in Stonehenge, because it's above a yin aquifer, which is Earth's natural water, which creates the conduit for higher frequencies to come through the crystalline monoliths. So we have basically these stone circles. When I went there with Donna and a group, I think it was March last year now, and Donna was doing what is known as tonal rolls, which is voice harmonics, and she actually made the stones sing.
Wow.
Literally reverberate. Now, when you start looking at modern day phones and we have ringtones, well, Stonehenge was a ring stone.
Okay.
Because it reverberated this frequency around the ringtone, the ringstones. And we have this crystalline replica of what happens in the body. You know, when you look at Karnak, which is in France, and you have all of these small monoliths, hundreds of them, really that is creating a chemical electricity. Now, that chemical electricity, magnetite, is created in the pineal gland. So they are really replicating what happens inside the endocrine system of the brain, and that is why the Great Pyramid marks out the exact location of your three main spiritual centers: pituitary gland, thalamus, and the pineal gland. They are leading the way, or showing the way, how to follow them to their divine godlike status.
Yeah, you mentioned you know, the practices that ancient people did, like using sound, and you mentioned the stones and how they were used create with sound and sonic waves, and you know, channeling this into the water. In this modern day, how do we bring this to our modern day living? What can we do? And I'm curious, Michael, do you use any practices yourself?
No, the only thing that I do is I learn. I have lots of downloads that give me information, that piece things together for me. I have ideas that start as an idea, then develop into a theory, then develop into guided research, then develop into basically a jigsaw piece, a gigantic jigsaw piece. Now, when you start seeing the same numbers repeating all the time, the same symbols all over the world, you know, from the Mayans to the Sumerians, to the Babylonians, to the Egyptians, to the Kabbalah, who, you know, wrote all these biblical scriptures. When you start to see the exact same things all over the world, you know, the crash at Roswell is connected to Jesus. It's connected to the Mayan prophecy of 2012, because it's connected by numerology and sacred numerology, and the number 33 and the 33rd parallel. And when you look at the 33rd parallel, when you got 33 degrees longitude, 33 degrees latitude, they meet at Mount Hermon, which is really where Jesus became illuminated. Now, Mount Hermon is Mount Sion, is Mount Zion, and it's on the 33rd parallel. And all of these major things in the world, the banking institutions are on the 33rd parallel. JFK was assassinated on the 33rd parallel. The Roswell crash was deliberately, whether it was a crash or a landing, it was deliberately located where it was, because it's connected to the 33rd parallel. Christ died age 33. The word Amen equals 33. You have 33 degrees of masonry. The 33rd mention of Jacob in the Bible mentions Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder is the spine, which has 33 vertebrae. The 33rd vertebrae is known as Atlas. Now, that leads us to the lost city of Atlantis. Atlantis means the island of Atlas. Atlas, really, when you see Atlas holding up the world, that is really the 33rd vertebrae holding up the consciousness, holding up the mind. Now, Plato, who's the first person to ever mention the lost city of Atlantis, The lost city of Atlantis is humanity who has lost its knowledge. Now, Plato was the first person to mention Atlantis, and he said it was the island that ruled seven. Now, the pineal gland is situated between the two hemispheres of the brain. It is surrounded by the cerebrospinal fluid. It is an island. The pineal gland is the master gland that rules the seven chakras. It is the island that rules the seven islands. That is what Plato was talking about. And the reactivation of the Atlantean crystals is the reactivation of the crystalline pineal gland. Now, between the pituitary gland and the pineal gland, there is a crystalline region known as the Crystal Palace, hence the reason there is a football team called Crystal Palace. It is this Atlantean and Lemurian reactivation of this crystalline knowledge inside the brain. It is the temple of God. It is Golgotha, the place of skulls. It is all telling us, whichever culture that you wish to look at, you know, the Anunnaki, the Sumerian scrolls that people think is this extraterrestrial race that came down and tinkered with DNA. Yes, it's talking about DNA, but it's talking about human potential through genetic transmutation, not an extraterrestrial race that came here and created Homo sapiens. It is all telling us about human potential through genetic and other transmutations. And that is what the whole of the ancient world, the whole of religions, every one of them is telling you the same thing.
Yeah, we've got so many resources. We've got so much potential within us, just waiting to be tapped and, you know, utilized. It's quite exciting, actually. Now we meditate, don't we? And we have experimented with the breathing technique to get the spinal fluid up. But it takes discipline, doesn't it? We're having different metaphorical muscle, aren't we, to the way we used to. I mean, it's so easy just to turn on the TV or, you know, to just go on the internet or, you know, do all these other things and distractions. But it takes will, as you said earlier, to actually, right, that's it. I'm going to spend this half an hour, whatever it is, doing this practice. And, you know, we've got all sorts of other things. I mean, we've worked with mantras. Mantras are also very good, which I'm sure you would advocate as well. And, you know, toning, like Donna did at the Stones. There's so many different ways to access this. And we also make sure we take out fluoride from our water, which obviously, as many people know, it blocks the pineal gland.
Yes, calcifies it.
It does. I mean, as it says, you know, the kingdom of God is within you, and it says that for a particular reason, because it really is within you. And again, all of these religious scriptures, you know, about my Father's house has many rooms. What does that mean? He's talking about dimensions and the frequency within dimensions, and the Father's house is the universe. We are part of that. You know, when Jesus cured the blind, what does that mean? Well, Jesus cured the sick. Sick is related to the word seek. So when we seek, we are cured of blindness, we are cured of ignorance. But you have to seek to be cured of this ignorance, and you are cured of this ignorance through knowledge, through Gnostic knowledge. Gnostic means to know. Mathematics means mathema, which means to know. It is this underlying education system that has been hidden from us so that we don't know. But yes, it does take effort, because we spent, well, thousands of years not doing it anymore. Now, all of a sudden, you know, when you want to sit down in this quiet space, it's extremely difficult because there's so many different things going on that stops your quiet space. And it's difficult to create that quiet space for you. And it does take effort. It takes a lot of effort. I mean, before the high priest would take pharaohs and initiates into these mystery schools initiations, they had spent decades purifying each of their chakras, each of their vessels, before they were equipped to take the final initiations of the pyramids. It took them years. Now, these are people who are dedicating their life to this way of life, and it's taken them decades to do it. And, you know, so we sitting here in Birmingham and other places, it's going to take a lot of time for us to do that, but nobody is different to anybody else, and everybody has the same abilities. We all have the same makeup. We all have the same mechanisms. We all have the same access to the quantum field. We all have access to everything that they had access to, and more, because we now should have inputted more into the electromagnetic field of our own body, and also the electromagnetic field of Earth. That is informational frequency that is coming back at us, that we have access to. Now, by hypercommunication, we can connect to all of this sacred information, which is what they did. So that we have the same mechanisms and the same opportunities as them, but our life has shut it down. And we have to work extremely hard to get it back. But then again, so did they. So, you know, we're not alone in how difficult this is.
One of my favorite quotes from the New Testament, which a lot of people overlook or don't even know is in there, is blatantly talking about the pineal gland. And it's, if thine eye be single, then the body shall be full of light. And you know, and it's a single eye, not if your eyes. If thine eye be single, the body will be full of light. And that's obviously referring to going in and awaking up the pineal gland.
Of course, is you know, and you know, you have the main pyramids of Tikal. Tikal means Tika, which is third eye. You have the Vatican, Vatica, which is the third eye, which is where you have pine cones everywhere. You know, you have all of these references to the pineal gland, and of course, yes. And of course, when you go to Egypt and you look at the word Osiris, which is what I was saying, is represents by the pineal gland, which is the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Osiris comes from Os-Iri, which means many eyes. So we have the three eyes, and that is that the pyramids are aligned to Orion's belt, which are the two physical eyes, and the third eye, which is also the three crosses of Golgotha.
Okay, you just answered one of my questions, which was going to be, if the pyramid if the Great Pyramid is representing the brain, why is it pointing at Orion? But you've just answered that question.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Os-Iri, many eyes, Osiris.
Yeah.
And that is also why one of the chambers of the pyramid, the Queen's Chamber, goes up towards Sirius A. Now, Sirius A gives us the word master, mother star, and it also gives us the word mason, mother sun, because it's meant to be the power behind the solar sun, which is the original, in astronomy, it's the original Mary, which is Isis, and Jesus, which is Horus. And that came from Egypt. So the Queen's Chamber points up towards Sirius A, which is really the blazing star of masonry, because Sirius means scorching. And you have the energy, which is the 33rd degree ascension frequency that comes down the chambers into the Queen's Chamber. Now, the pituitary gland, ironically, is known as the star chamber of Isis. So Isis is the pituitary gland, which is represented by the Queen's Chamber, which has a shaft going up to Sirius A, who is also associated with Isis. So they are telling us of this spiritual mechanism within the brain.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing how accurate their building techniques were, you know, and you know, to the finest degree.
Yeah.
It illustrates the intelligence they were using and tapping into.
Yeah.
Well, they had an advanced knowledge, and I think that advanced knowledge was given to them because and even including myself, what you believe to be individual projects, where you look at the super pyramids of the world and you look at all these monuments and you think that they were separate projects in isolation. They were all working together for one common theme, and that is why all the super pyramids of Earth are along 19.5 degrees, which is the energy belt of the planet. And you will see that even the Sidonian city on Mars is 19.5 degrees. When you start looking at the Nineveh constant, which is basically a calculation that puts the rotations of the planet into a certain cycle, and that is a 6.2 million cycle. Even that contains 19.5 because it's written mathematically as 19.5, 10, triangle 10, which is really a shorthand way of writing mathematics. In long term, the Nineveh constant, which is really the cycle of all the planets of the solar system, is 70 times 60, 7 times, which gives you 19.5, 10 by 10, which is really a shorthand version. And even that contains 19.5 degrees. The whole anomalies of nature adhere to 19.5 degrees north or south of the equator. So a tornado, a storm, it is always 19.5 degrees. The super pyramids of the Earth are 19.5 degrees. During the last ice age, when the North Pole was over Greenland, 19.5 degrees went straight through the Great Pyramid. Now, this was hundreds of thousands of years ago. So the Great Pyramid is at least hundreds of thousands of years old. So when NASA tell you that the Sidonian city was created by wind, they are fractionally possibly correct, because there is a branch of science known as aerokinesis or air bending, where you can actually control the wind and the air by your mind, and that's aerokinesis. So if something is so powerful that it can can control the elements, then it would be able to actually build and formulate these monuments and monoliths, not only on Mars, but also on Earth. Then when you start taking that and you start looking at the Hebrew god Yahweh, the Yod He Woo He, is really the divine force within the four elements. When you take that to crop circles, and my belief that many of them is actually the power of the mind. Now, what you believe to be a crop circle is actually an oval. And the reason it's oval is because geometrically, the shape of fort, Teote of Egypt, the shape of fort is the oval. We have the oval office. We have all of these oval references, Easter, the egg, the oval. It's the geometric shape of fort. Now, these geometric shapes that are crop circles, to me, are someone's mind creating them as a message. The same as they may well be creating these monoliths through controlling the elements to create them.
Whose mind is creating these crop circles?
That is the million-dollar question, because my feeling is that the creator itself is doing it. Because I believe the creator who is observing this reality into existence, the collapse of the wave function from the wave to the particle of matter, that is done by observation. Now, when you stop observing something, it then returns back to the unified field, and it's no longer matter. You don't see it. So it's observed into existence. It is the same mind that through a thought that became an energy that created manifestation, that created physicality. It is the same mind that is creating crop circles that are diatonic ratio messages within frequencies, and is also creating these monoliths as a stepping stone to get back to this unified field. So it is so great and it is so fascinating that it may well even be the creative force itself leaving the stepping stones to return back to the unified field.
What a side glance question on that front. While we're talking about crop circles, you must have heard of the crop circle, beware the bearer of false gifts. Have you come across this one? Yeah, that appears to be, I mean, obviously it's down as one of the genuine ones, because they found magnetic particles in the soil, and it cropped up in about, pun not intended, in about an hour. But it was it had a picture, for those who don't know. It had what looked like a portrait of what we would call the typical grey, and a message encoded in a disc next to it, which said, beware the bearer of false gifts, much time but still pain to come, or something, conduit closing. That surely that did not come directly from source. That came from an ET race. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here.
Yeah, it certainly can. I mean, you see, every race, every creation also has the knowledge and the know-how to create. So you have the universal force, which created as a thought, which then became this manifestation, this eureka moment where we're all living inside the great mind. But you also have races that also have the ability to replicate that and do that. Now, humans now, and at least since 2007, Japanese scientists were able to impregnate human DNA with coded messages that went from generation to generation to generation. In 2012, they also did the same thing with subatomic particles, neutrinos, where they actually implanted messages. Now, DNA was obviously not created by humans. DNA was created elsewhere, but humans are now, or are demonstrating now, the ability to change DNA, to encode messages within DNA that is going from generation to generation. So within each race, within each creation, there is also the ability to create. So yes, of course, there are advanced extraterrestrial races, and for anyone who has ever seen the unorthodox craft that they're flying around with, which many of them, of course, are operated by the mind. And when you see some of these things that go against, the standard model of physics that we know, you understand that there are races out there that are far more advanced, far more intelligent in relation to that advancement. And of course, they do have the ability to replicate what is already being done. So if humans can create balls of light with their mind, and there are other races that can create these balls of light with their mind, then of course, when you start getting to the real top of the tree, then you're then talking about dimensions, multiverses, parallel existences. And we all exist, even in this third dimension. You know, we are all multidimensional. Now, this show is multidimensional. The live shows that you put on is a multidimensional show. We all exist in a multidimensional reality. And how to explain that simply is, if I'm a tightrope walker, now my reality is the rope. That is my reality. That is the only reality that I know, is the rope. So as the tightrope walker, I'm able to walk backwards and forwards. So my rope, my reality, is one dimensional. Now, if I'm smaller, for argument's sake, if I'm an ant or an insect and I live on the same rope, I live in the same reality, I live in the same existence of time and space on this rope. But because of my size, I can also move forwards and backwards, but I can also move left and right, side to side. So my reality is two-dimensional, but I'm still existing in the same reality as you, which is one dimension. So this is how different multidimensional beings can exist in the same space and time, in the same reality, have interaction with each other, but yet be of a different dimension. And we have we have this wonderful creation, this wonderful brilliance around us that we are part of, and we've disconnected ourselves from it. But if we are to reconnect ourselves to it, then in a reality of all possibility, then all things are possible.
Yeah, I like the analogy that was given by a friend the other day, actually. She said that you can go to the same address and you can go into the building, and you can look back and you can see the streets, and you can see the surroundings. But then and obviously you've got the noise of the streets. But if you go up to the top of the building, for instance, if it's a skyscraper and you're at the top at the same address, but you see a lot more of the surroundings, and it's peaceful and it's quiet and it's still. So yeah, there's another analogy to use about our ability to see things from different perspectives.
And again, making that analogy bigger still to a galaxy, that you have these within these galaxies, you have parts of space that are outside of time and space, which certain extraterrestrial races call corridors. And if you give the analogy of you're in a school and there's a couple of classrooms, those classrooms are, for argument's sake, the third dimension, and you walk into that third dimension and you interact with everybody else in that classroom, which is the third dimensional reality. But you step outside of the classroom and you walk down the corridor, you become invisible to that reality. Now you can come, walk down the corridor and go into the same classroom another way. So basically, in effect, you've disappeared and reappeared into their reality, which is what many UFOs are doing. They are coming, they are leaving our reality. It appears as if they are blinking in and out, but what they're doing is they're leaving our reality, going into these universal corridors, and then re-entering our reality at the time that they wish, where sometimes there has been no time that has passed, because in the quantum field, in the quantum world, time is infinite. So therefore, there is no separation between the past, now, and the future. Everything is one. And I have actually personally experienced consciousness remote viewing, which was time travel back to another time event. And that was in 2009. So again, there's these different analogies which mean the same thing, which is we can exist as multidimensional beings in the same reality and have interactions with each other. But yet, you can be one-dimensional, I can be two-dimensional. Someone who can walk forwards and backwards, side to side, up and down, becomes three-dimensional. But we can all live in the same reality.
Makes you wonder, the visitations we get from other races, visitations from the spirit world. Begs the question then, who are they? Could they be us? If we're living on a multi-dimensional reality, it gets quite interesting, doesn't it?
Well, it can get quite mind-blowing, because technically, it could well be us, because if they come from a place of one constant continuum of snapshots, and there is no separation between what we deem to be the past, now, and the future, then of course, yes. What we exist in at the moment is linear time. So we literally have a start, a middle, a finish. If you step outside of linear time into lateral time, then you have a much more panoramic view of the timeline. And that is how you are able to predict, when you go for medium readings or you have channel messages and they say, continue along this line and this is likely to happen, because they are looking at time laterally. So they are looking at your snapshot of time in one go. Now, that snapshot of time is exactly how the brain and the eyes work and communicate with each other. If you go to an accident, which I've done many times, and people who've been involved in accidents will say, I didn't see the car coming. Well, that is correct, because that car was in between the two frames of their snapshot of time.
Yeah.
And they literally could not see it because it was in between the two frames. Now, when it comes into the frame, that's when you can see it. If you imagine a movie reel and you have these flickering slides, that is really how reality works. And, you know, you may have the same time frame, you may have the same frames of constriction, but the vibration would just mean that there are more movie slides within the same confines. So there is more information, there is more opportunity within the same confines. So again, that is another analogy of how we can have all of these things within the same reality, within the same dimension, within the same timeframes. But the brain works the same and time works the same, because in the atomic world, it's completely different. And of course, time comes from the oscillation of the cesium atom. So time is really atomic, which gives us the basis of the second, which gives us the whole basis of time, which is atomic. So again, my thoughts at night that keep me awake is if time is subatomic and atomic, and the atoms and subatomic particles were created at the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, there was no atoms, there was no time, only infinity.
Do you ever sleep?
And there's the kind of things that will keep me awake at night, thinking of these sort of deeper, meaningful things, and eventually I will just drop off. And then sometimes when I drop off, there's mathematical equations that come into my head, or mathematical symbols or geometric symbols that can take. The last one was just a square root symbol, and the number's 937. So in other words, the square root of 937. It took me the whole of the next day to work out what that message was. But in essence, it goes back to the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. It goes to the honeycomb of the bee, which is the hexagram, which is knowledge. And again, it goes into the breath technique, the Bra Mari, which is the bumble, which means bumblebee in Sanskrit, which is the breath technique that quietens the mind for meditation. Because as the Bible tells us, the inn was full. So in other words, if the mind is not quiet and the inn is full, you do not create the conditions to create this super consciousness within you.
I like it.
Yeah. We've got another 20 minutes or so. I just want to make sure people are aware that they can type their questions in on the Zoom chat. There's a text option. You can also just unmute yourself and say, excuse me, and we'll take your questions. I've got one here from Ian. Hi, Michael. You have been working on decoding symbols that tell of human awakening for quite some time. To be awakened means to know and realise one's true potential, I think. I wonder if you have developed any abilities as an awakened man. Do you have any powers that an unawakened man might call superhuman? If so, how has it changed your connection or experience of the world?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It is in terms of powers. No, we all have the same. We all have the same powers. We are, to a certain extent, policed by 5 senses, by 7 colours, by the speed of light. The human body cannot exceed the speed of light, because the particles, which are leptons and quarks, they bind together into structured matter. Now, anything above the speed of light, they cannot physically bind together. So physicality cannot exist beyond the speed of light. So that is really a ceiling for our reality. So we are, to a certain extent, limited. So in terms of powers, no. How has it changed my view of the world? It has made me see my purpose. It's made me see that I'm really connected to everything else. And that is really something that elevates you. It raises your vibrations. It raises your frequency. Now, as I was saying earlier, my father's house has many rooms. The universe has many vibrational frequencies. And if you tap into various frequencies of the universe, you alter realities. You can enter into somebody else's reality. Now, the significance of entering into somebody else's reality is you then start to be able to see things. You start to be able to see UFOs. You start to be able to see spirits. You start to be able to see shadow people who rattle your door at 6 o'clock in the morning and then walk through the bedroom wall 30 feet in the air. You begin to see all of these things because you're tuning into different realities. Now, as human beings, we see considerably less than 1% of the frequency spectrum. So all the things that we see, all the things that we experience, all the things that we smell, touch and taste as a sensory world is far less than 1%. So there's a lot in the 99 plus percent that we don't see. Now the number 99 comes back time and time again. We're told that scientifically atoms are 99.9999% empty space. For me, that empty space is the intelligent field that observes atoms into physicality, which goes again to the collapse of the wave function, how everything in this reality is observed into existence, and we can observe our own reality into existence. The atoms are observed into existence by that 99 point plus empty space, which is the intelligent quantum field that is forever around us. And this, in my opinion, is what observes our atoms into physicality. So once you start to realize these things, once you start to reconnect to these things, you begin to expand and expand and expand, just like the universe is expanding and expanding and expanding. Now, the natural order of things, the natural order of evolution and progression is to continue to expand. And when you start to learn these things, when you start to connect to these things, it automatically expands you to these other realities. So can I lift a bottle up in my mind? I have the ability to do that, but I can't do it yet. Can I like Bruce Lee does and palm someone and not touch them and send them across the room? I have the ability to do that. We all do, but I can't do it. So for me, what this knowledge has done for me is to advance my vibration, advance my reality, and advance my understanding of the way things are.
Yeah, and I would say, to add to that as your awareness grows, you're able to see more of the spectrum, see beyond the usual bandwidth that we are restricted to. Question, Michael, where do you see this leading? If we're on a general trajectory of becoming more and more awake and more kind of united with our own divine consciousness, do you see the earth changing? Do you see us being able to create and change the way our world is currently looking, and overcome some of the pitfalls that are around us, like the 5G that's coming out? Do you see us being able to create the earth that we actually need and truly desire?
Well, the truth is that we can create our own reality. Now, when you can create your own reality, then you can create the life that you want. If enough people focus on what they want instead of what they don't want, then it will change things. The issue, first of all, is informing people that they have the power within them to do that. Because again, as we're going back to the beginning about people have become so reliant on outside forces to feed them and to clothe them and to bring their shopping to them, because we become so reliant on outside things, we've sort of forgot that we have the ability to take care of ourselves and to do these things ourselves. So the first stumbling block is to re-educate people and reprogram people to make them realize that everything really that you can possibly need is you. You really are the center of everything, and you can create your own reality. And if everybody is thinking about the same thing, we just had a global meditation of 1 million people.
Yeah.
That is going to have changed something. If everybody's focused on the same thing, 1 million people are focused on the same thing, there would have been changes. Because the power of force of the mind is really so powerful. It is unlimited. That would have sent ripples throughout the whole of the universe. Now, when you look at the universal structure, that hydrogen were the first stars, but hydrogen, the nucleus of the hydrogen, is what we later called the proton. Now, the proton was in existence within seconds of the Big Bang. Proton gives you proto, which is prototype, which is original. So each of these subatomic particles that are part of us were all part of original creation. Now, each small proton and subatomic particle contains every minute bit of information of every single proton or subatomic particle of the whole of the universe. Now, we are made up of these subatomic particles, so therefore we have the knowledge of the whole universe that has ever existed, and we have that information at our fingertips, because our very makeup is the essence of this creation. When people start to realize how supernatural and how brilliant they are, and really how they can change the world overnight. They really can change the world overnight.
Yeah.
But because we become segregated, because we believe that, we are this organic body that lives and dies, and, you work, you pay taxes, and that's all you do. You struggle all of your life. You create these neural pathways of routine that give you a predictable future because it's the same as exactly what you've always done. People are living their life in these Newtonian physics of predictable outcomes. This is the third dimensional world. Now, when you get outside of these Newtonian predictable outcomes, you become part of the unified field of all possibility. When you are in the realm of all possibility, it speaks for itself. Anything, everything is all possible. So we can do it, but it just takes enough people to actually do it in collective numbers.
Yeah, I looked at a report that was shared on social media by someone I know, and it showed that the Earth human resonance shot up during that global meditation. And I have no reason to disbelieve that. There's a graph there showing this big influx. So yeah. There's tangible evidence that consciousness has amazing abilities. We've seen it ourselves, and there's many scientific studies out there pointing to this fact as well. You've mentioned the act of observation collapsing the wave function. There was many experiments done with double slit experiment, and there's others besides that. Intention experiments. I'm involved with Dave and Ian, who's on the call there, in a Power of 8 group, and that was spurred on by a lady called Lynn McTaggart, who you may have heard of, quite famous in the field of consciousness. Lots of studies done on how focusing attention on things like peace in another country, and really focusing on that has shown a physical decrease in the level of violent crimes in that particular country. So there's a lot of evidence out there for people that need to see the evidence for it.
And of course, the human resonance as well. It's been proven in scientific studies that if people are deprived of the human resonance, they become ill. They suffer migraines. They become ill. So when they were reintroduced to the human resonance, which is 7.83 hertz, then they suddenly became well again. So if this mass meditation has increased the Earth's human resonance, which is really part of the electromagnetic grid, which is shooting the human resonance down to us. If it's raising the human resonance, then of course human health will improve as well as a result. So these kind of things actually nullify the bad effects of the likes of 5G and other things that are coming from us from all different directions, because we are increasing vibrations. Now, if we increase vibrations, nothing can touch us. And that is why we are kept in such a low ebb, because we are then susceptible to these things. But the creation of an expanded human resonance, a high frequency, will improve the health of humanity.
Basically offset the effects of 5G.
It does. And if you lift our vibrations sufficiently, you can't be touched, you can't be stopped.
Yeah, that was something that that came to me, really, basically, that if we vibrate at enough frequency, then we have that natural protection. So really it's in all our interest to do the inner work and discipline, whatever discipline it is, whether it's Tai Chi, meditation, yoga, breathing techniques, they all lead to the same ability to then master the mind and create that mind-body-heart connection.
It does. And of course, the heart is the biggest contributor to that electromagnetic grid around the body, the apple of Eden. And the picture that you have behind you, the Northern Lights, is basically Earth's electromagnetic grid. But it's proof of it, because when the two poles push together, that's called the magnetic moment. And that creates the magnet, which is creating the electromagnetic field. Now, when the photons, in such as solar storms, hit that electromagnetic field, they give the Northern Lights, which is what you have behind you. So this is our basically witnessing Earth's magnetic field, and the body has this electromagnetic field, and between them, this creates the human resonance, which obviously gives us our health, gives us our well-being, and all this kind of thing. So everything, we are electromagnetic beings. And when we start, when you start looking at the Apple logo, which has the bite out of the apple, that is really telling you of a disrupted circuit. Because when the circuit is disrupted, all of these things break down. And really, again, it's all the symbology of how the body, the electromagnetic body, works. And when it's at its most optimum, nothing can touch you. And that is why we need to think about it and set our life aside to make ourselves this untouchable being, which is what we really are.
Yeah. So final message then, Michael. We're coming to the end. And I've got a message from Ian actually. He says, thanks for your insights. Yeah, we do have a few minutes if people want to give a final comment or quick question. He says, I wonder though, if as you believe you are studying codes put there by cultures that are thousands or hundreds of years ahead of our society, why is it that you have not given us insights or knowledge that modern science can take into a lab and prove or discover something new to them? Surely science is greedy for new, powerful, provable scientific laws or insights, and would be keen to test a hard fact.
What we believe to be modern science is really an ancient knowledge. So the ancients had an advanced knowledge of DNA. They had an advanced knowledge of electromagnetisms. They have advanced knowledge of sound. They had advanced knowledge of the brain. They have advanced knowledge of the body. They have advanced spiritual knowledge. They had advanced knowledge by way of they were able to connect outside of this planet. One of the reasons that they situated everything at 19.5 degrees is 19.5 degrees is where the light body of Earth meets the surface. This is where you can actually communicate beyond this realm. They understood science that we cannot even understand now with all the sophisticated equipment in the mainstream. A lot of the things that I'm saying has been proven by science. It's genetic science, it's spiritual science, it's science that is outside of the mainstream, that is not heard, because mainstream science blocks it out. Everything that I say is provable by science, but it is a bodily spiritual science that the ancients understood. Science will eventually catch up, and when it does, it will realize that it's thousands of years behind where it should be. And that is really going to be a harsh reality for scientists when they realize that. So when I'm talking about the Anunnaki and I'm talking about atoms and genetics, it's a biological science. It is provable science. When I'm talking about the way the brain works, the endocrine system of the brain works, which is marked out in the Great Pyramid, that is a biological science. It is a provable science. All of these things that I'm saying about consciousness is a provable science. A provable science is when you use correct breath techniques and correct procedures, you can lift your cerebrospinal fluid to your brain, which creates a consciousness evolution. It is provable science. So in terms of can we prove all this? Yes, we can. And there's been endless studies that have proved it time and time again, that all of these things that have been said and what I've said and others are saying is provable science. Science just means to know. So when mainstream science catches up with this, it will be a harsh reality. Of course, there is science behind the scenes, and there is science in other parts of the world that are proving this beyond, but they're never heard because, in the Western arena, these things don't exist. Only mainstream science exists, and they're many thousands of years behind.
Yeah, it's controlled like everything else, isn't it? But there are independent studies out there. You look at Stanford University, for example. There's many studies done there into consciousness, the field of quantum physics.
Yeah, of
many
course.
Done again, but independently, you won't hear of them on the whole. And then you have to get through the peer review if you want to get it really recognised.
Yeah.
And of course, that has its controls, doesn't it? And
well, of course. I mean, you look at remote viewing. And modern day science tells you that this is not possible. But yet the Princeton University proved that remote viewing, they call backward in time signaling, is possible. So in a science lab, they proved remote viewing. So that is science proof that you can actually consciously, through consciousness entanglement, you can go to another time frame, to another time event by remote viewing, which is basically viewing something that is happening elsewhere, regardless of distance. So all of these things are scientifically proven, but you won't hear this in mainstream. You won't hear Brian Cox on BBC One talking about this.
No, you won't. I mean, the CIA spent billions of US taxpayers' dollars on, I think it was called Project Twinkle, which was the story where they used remote viewing to look into what the Chinese were doing and the Russian were doing. and that's come out in the under the Freedom of Information Act now. All that documents are freely available on their website.
Yeah.
They were taking remote viewing seriously enough to spend billions of dollars on it. So it wasn't a couple of $100. No, this isn't going to work. They spent billions.
Well, I've personally done it, and it wasn't intentional. I've personally done it, but you won't hear modern Western science admitting that it's possible.
No, we run a remote viewing group as well. We've had some startlingly accurate results.
Yes.
Stuff that is not remotely down to chance.
No.
So we're convinced.
Yeah.
We know there's something to it.
I think that's a good invitation to people out there that are skeptical to do these experiments themselves. Do an intention experiment on the plants. From a seedling, send intention, see if it grows into, and have control where there's a plant or seedling that doesn't have any focus on it, and focus on one plant growing and ignore the other plant and look at the difference between the two. I mean, there's lots of things you can do.
Yeah.
And remote viewing, you can test remote viewing skills.
Yeah.
Again, you can prove that everything in the universe is conscious as well. You can get, and it's been proven that you can get a photon and you can get a entangled photon. Now, regardless of their distance, it can be a universe apart, but those photons know to be the opposite. So if you have photon A, which is upright, automatically in an instant, a universe away, photon B knows to be upright. They are talking to each other at a distance of a universe. They are conscious.
Yeah.
And these things are provable science.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think we could probably sit here all night and talk, but I think we are coming to time.
Yes, we are. Yes. So, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show and to talk to you in person, and unpick some of the things you said and pose some questions to you. It's been great having this conversation. Really fascinating. I hope there's a follow-up soon. It's
No, thank you. And anytime, just saying we'll do it again. Great
stuff.
Wonderful.
Okay then. Well, take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to connect to Michael, what is your website, please?
Thank you. It's www.michael-feeley.com.
And you've got a selection of books available there too, haven't you, for people that want
there is. There's lots of free blogs, YouTube videos, articles, books. There's all kinds of things on there for everyone.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. If you want to pose any more questions, then just go to the website and you'll find contact details to connect to Michael and ask away. Okay. Right. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Stay well, and remember to use the power of your mind in whichever way you can to raise that vibration. Okay, then.
Right,
bye now, then, Michael.
Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.